reality. Thank you so much.
For that very eye-opening session. Thank you, esteemed panelists.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Moving on. As the rhythm of the industry evolves and the landscape of regulation grows ever more complex, the call to revamp traditional compliance becomes even more pressing. The need in the hour isn't simply to shun risks, but it's to understand the marriage and indigently navigate through them. Ladies and gentlemen, let's buckle up our seats for yet another enlightening panel discussion talking about the topic Compliance 2.0, shifting from risk aversion to risk intelligence. Please join me in welcoming the moderator for this talk, Radhika S. Lipton, who is the CEO and founder of RADD LLC. And the panelist joining her is Rebecca Stiles, who is the CFO of RHS Financial Mgmt, and Lisa Ann Palmer, founder and CEO of Light Your Leadership, Inc. Welcome to the stage.
Good morning. Oh, we can do better than that, right? Good morning. That's much better. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for MoRE 2.0 for bringing this panel together. We are going to pivot a little bit. As my esteemed colleague here shared with me this morning, there was 12,000 flights canceled yesterday. So I think there's going to, people are going to trickle in, and I also know you had some trouble getting in. So, lost lug. So our topic is risk aversion. How could we have avoided this, right? I want to hand it off to my colleagues first to, talk a little bit about their background. We are going to approach risk aversion and risk intelligence from almost three completely different industries. So it all touches on financial services and law and real estate, but we approach it from different perspectives. So first, I'll hand it off to Rebecca. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background?
So hi, everyone. I hope y'all found it here okay. Obviously, I did not. So I have been in the financial services field for about 20 years now. Recently started my own consulting company. I've spent the better part of the last 15 years working as a consultant across a wide array of industries and companies focusing on investment and risk management, strategic planning, implementing your ERP systems, and just doing a general kind of review of taxes and all of the possible exposures to, like risk exposures to compliance or risks related to compliance. Oh my goodness, I cannot hold the microphone, I'm sorry. Like I said, no sleep. I've also worked for about 12 years with a lot of nonprofit organizations who are desperately trying to manage the changing marketplace and maintain a sense of sustainability. So that's essentially what I do.
Well, I applaud your courage to be here and taking a risk, right? My name is Lisa Anna Palmer. My mic seems to be very loud. I'm sorry. I'll try to keep it. There we go. So I'm from Ottawa, Canada. I worked for now over 30 years in leadership development, human resources, organizational development, and I left Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation at 40, that's about 12 years ago, to start my own business because I'm very passionate about getting the word out there about the importance of leadership and the effect it has. And in fact, I'm here to advocate that people are the number one risk in your organizations. I've worked with financial institutions, as well as I had a group of lawyers who were my clients internally when I was working in a senior role in HR. And so I got to witness some of the struggles that they went through, as well as advising the chief risk officer. So I'm bringing the perspective of, how do people engage with risk and what's at the root of it from the human level.
Thank you so much. And I'm Radhika Lipton. I'm the CEO and founder of RADD LLC. We are a compliance and internal audit consulting firm, and our clients are community banks, credit unions, and fintechs. So when we talk about risk adverse, I'm on this side of the spectrum of risk adverse, and and trying to coach our clients on risk intelligence. So thank you and welcome. So let me ask you this, both of you. What does risk aversion mean to you, and what does risk intelligence mean to you?
Sure. Forgive me, I'm going to be reading. I think one of the main factors to keep in mind when talking about risk aversion, whether it's in technology or the legal field of compliance or even in investments in banking, is that it's essentially driven by a sense of emotional intelligence. People react to what they see on the news, and that forms their decision-making when it comes to managing their household budgets, to the jobs that they are applying to, and to the salaries that they're looking to get, as well as the real estate market and trying to be able to afford a new house. So when it comes to risk aversion, it's really, in my mind, not necessarily a strategy that is going to be a sustainable strategy over time, which isn't to say that certain organizations shouldn't set limits, and I think that's where risk acceptance comes in. You make sure that you're only going to put a certain amount of operating assets or investments at a percentage of your total operating income, so that you can maintain that sense of sustainability and not end up like companies like Silicon Valley Bank or Enron or even the whole crypto market, which is another fun discussion.
Yeah, so for me, risk aversion, working with thousands of people in workplaces and leaders, boils down to fear of making mistakes. And it manifests in different ways, from micromanagement all the way to people getting sick at work because they're too afraid to come in and make mistakes, people getting called out in front of others in the workplace, being humiliated because the company is not able to create a safe space so that people can make mistakes and experiment and innovate. And so to me, that's basically what it boils down to, is the fear of making mistakes at work, in our businesses, in society. And the good news is that fear can be reversed.
Thank you. And in our area in financial services, it is so many attributes, so many different vehicles. One, you're risk averse against doing the wrong thing by the client, right? Overcharging them on fees, or not calculating their interest rate correctly. Then you have the risk of profitability. Every time we turned around, you mentioned Silicon Valley Bank. Banks and financial institutions are measured under what we call a CAMELS rating, which is a variety of factors. And up until the recent failure of the banks, the biggest area was always asset management, right? The A in CAMELS. And now the risk averse is liquidity, because that's what the biggest issues were. But what's the umbrella over all of that? They're always afraid of what the regulators are going to come down with. And we have stacks and stacks and stacks, pages and pages of regulation, but it also comes down to interpretation. So the fear of what is, a rogue regulator going to assess this time is always on the top of their mind. So between profitability, doing what's right by the customer, and being in one of the most highly regulated, I would say second highest next to healthcare, and how to compete in that marketplace. So then what is risk intelligence?
Well, as I started to touch upon it, it's really, in my mind, driven by metrics. It's driven by knowing exactly how much money you want to put at stake and making sure that you have that, like a security fund, a savings to cover your general operating expenses. It involves a lot of research. It involves setting limits and guidelines, and I think this is also where board of directors or board of trustees tend to come into play. They can draft a whole document with standard operating procedures and then work with brokerage firms to manage the amount of money that they're literally putting at risk in the market, and doing the research of the new types of things that are coming about, like cryptocurrency and NFTs. Risk-averse people, myself included, would not have invested in those. But that doesn't, and it's, again, it's something that's exciting, it's something new, it's something people that are sort of gravitating towards, and in the reverse, with interest rates raising, people in the real estate market are like, oh, I don't want to buy a house now, it's too expensive, I can't get a good mortgage. And the reality is, it's driving the housing prices down. They're dropping by $50,000 to $100,000 a week. And just because you buy at a high interest rate doesn't mean you can't refinance in a year or two when we have somehow, hopefully, maintained a sense of stability with our debt as a country and our international relations with China, because that is always a factor. But at the end of the day, if you really want to make sure that you're covering your nut, you look at the GDP. That's not going to change. Not really going to change. I mean, there might be less farmers, but we still produce the same amount of products. We still ship them out. We managed during a pandemic and grew exponentially and put everything online, put everything in the cloud. So it's about adaptation as well. Yes, the regulations are going to change, and yes, you're going to need to hire people like us to be able to keep up with that and make sure that you're doing the right things. But also, the IRS, the Treasury, they're still trying to figure it out themselves. They didn't know what to do with cryptocurrency. It's not tied to a tangible asset, so they didn't know how to tax it. And again, that's in my sort of metric of risk, that's very high in terms of the percentile. So.
Yeah, those are really great points. And Rebecca, I'm going to come back to what you were said earlier about emotional intelligence, because from my perspective, they're very closely linked. So risk intelligence, emotional intelligence are very closely linked, because I'll just tell you a little story, okay? So maybe 15 years ago, when I was still working in corporate, I was supporting the chief risk officer in setting up the, the group that was going to take care of that. And they pulled from different parts of the organization, including business analysts, people who were doing all kinds of different roles. And at the senior management level, you don't always know what people are thinking in the front lines, but you see the problems, right? Either the clients are complaining, or staff aren't happy, or whatnot. So it was a bit of a guessing game as to what was going on. And because I was in HR, I was able to ask them, and I got some really interesting insights. So because the role had changed from service provider, advisor, to a challenge function, they really, really were under a lot of stress and pressure. So from one day to the next, they had to shift roles. They had to go from being well loved by their clients to now being the person who sticks it to them, where they're not following policy or corporate direction. And, they weren't vice presidents or directors even. They were the front lines. And so what they would have in return are clients that became very animated and sometimes lost their temper with them. They weren't prepared for that. They didn't understand what was going on. They just wanted to do a good job. So here you had people in the bowels of the organization who were getting pressure from senior management to play a challenge function, and at the same time, they were being squeezed by the client because the client was really upset at them. So imagine the human experience of people every day who have to shift role without necessarily getting the proper support to do it. So by offering leadership development of emotional intelligence, giving them insight into what was going on and how to handle those difficult situations would have greatly increased their risk intelligence and their ability to pass that on to their clients. So if you're looking at risk intelligence, from my perspective, it's having the confidence to be able to play a challenge function, to do risk reviews and assessments, and be equipped, and you're confident, not just because you're one of those confident extroverts that everything is easy for them and all that stuff. That's not what I mean. I mean you're confident because you're equipped, you're empowered, you're supported. Leaders have your back when your clients are yelling at you. That's, to me, is what emotional intelligence is in organizations, both at the individual level, at the organizational level, is how do you create safe spaces for your employees to be able to carry out your risk management functions.
Thank you. And I'm going to lean in onto your comment about data and the use of data. So first I'm going to ask the audience here, how many members here in the audience are in financial services? How many of you use data to determine your overall risk profile of your institution? That's good. How many of you are scared to use data? Right? I would say that is predominant way in our industry, in my industry, to really understand how to mitigate risk, how to understand your risk. And one of the things that I was talking to Elisa Ann about is not just measuring risk on a vertical perspective, but also a horizontal perspective, and collecting data to understand that. How do you know if you don't have a systemic problem across your organization, not just in one department? When you're talking about people risk, obviously if you've got in a community bank or a credit union, you've got a small department and the manager is gone, all your controls are pretty much gone with it. And many times, a lot of the knowledge that we have is in our head and not documented in the SOP that you were referring to. So you've lost a huge part of what could have been a very well-functioning department. But, if you look across the enterprise, did you lose 2 more people in senior level capacities? And how is the board looking at that? So for me, risk intelligence is really understanding your data, using queries to look at your loan portfolio to see if you've got common issues, looking, queries on your deposit accounts to see if you have common issues, but then on the HR side.
Yeah, no, and I want to just add to that in terms of data. So I see organizations bring in new tools all the time. And now you got ChatGPT, and you got this and that and the other, you got SAT, you got all kinds of new tools. And I know even myself as a business owner and my team, we've had to learn like 10 different pieces of software in the last 6 months. It's a lot. And the thing is, if you just tell people to, go and learn it, or you'll learn it from your colleague Joe or Jane or whatnot, and you don't invest in the proper training, the proper education, that's when you should be scared. You shouldn't be scared of data. You should be scared of if people are using that data and they're not properly trained or equipped to do it. And then what are you going to do? Come back and blame them for it? Right? So I think when it comes to anything where you're introducing new technology, new ways of using data, be it big data, be it what you name it, is to make sure that when you are handing that responsibility off to your employees, that you make sure they have everything they need to succeed. And if they don't, and they make mistakes, you better practice radical accountability instead of blaming.
Thank you.
Well put.
I know, very well done. So what does a risk policy look like to both of you? And if you were going to present that to a board, what do you think their expectations are, and how do you get the board to buy in, especially when it comes to asking for resources, especially, or technology. Technology is expensive as well. So
I deal with boards very much a lot, and what I like to do is say that I demystify the financial statements. People who are on boards of directors or board trustees, they just want to know that their money is going to the right place, that they're not going to end up with a deficit, and that the company that they run is going to be able to survive in an ever-changing climate, which means adapting, as Lisa was saying. So many technologies are coming out. People like us are spending a lot of time making sure that we are up to date. And not only up to date, we have the ability to then advise companies on how to either modify their current systems, integrate them, and address the fear of the employee. Because, I mean, my father used to say this to me all the time, and I went completely the other way. He said, don't write anything down, because then you don't make yourself useful anymore. They can fire you, and they have the Bible to whatever you need to do your job. I obviously go the other route. I make sure everything is documented. You need that standard operating procedure, and what needs to be built into it as well is that touch base with every level of employee, making sure that when larger strategic decisions, albeit not necessarily investment strategy, are being made about how to move your company forward, whether it's change management and you need to downsize, or you need to figure out how to build an environment that's virtual or hybrid because it's just too expensive to pay for a lease on, for example, in New York on Fifth Avenue, when only 5 out of 25 people in your company is coming into the office. So it's about making sure, as Lisa was saying, that people are trained, people have the ability to give their opinion or to at least feel like they're being involved in the decision-making process. Leadership teams and executive teams and C-suites have a real habit of just sort of keeping everything to themselves, making the decisions, and then dictating it down to the company. And again, not providing the tools and resources that people down the chain and on the front lines are actually needing to do. They need to be trained on the new software and realize that they're not being replaced. The idea is that it's creating a more efficient way to do your job so that you can expand on what you're doing. You can spend more time on analysis. You can create an entire metric scale like I do to measure out how much, whether it's in terms of money or the types of investments that you're using, or if it's for real estate property. You can lay it out and then have a more informed conversation with the board of trustees or the board of directors. But it has to, it's also the KISS method. You have to keep it simple, stupid. Like,
Yes.
the
I agree, Rebecca, because
Right?
I'm on the board. And
Oh.
you're absolutely right.
Like,
You're
no
right.
one wants to hear me wax philosophic about like debt scenarios and equity ratios. No, they want to know that they're not going to lose money in the market, or that if they lost a percentage, that they just need to adjust how much money is going into that pot and how much they need to reserve for their operating expenses.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So I'm on a nonprofit board right now, and you're right. It's not our area of expertise. So keep it simple, sweetie, maybe, or.
Not PC, sorry.
That's okay. It was funny. But the other thing, too, is if you want to sway the board, you need to connect it to the purpose of the organization. Like, if you do this, this is going to help serve, the people that we're serving in the community better. Tell stories, because stories inspire, right? Be able to break it down to what they need to know, not everything else, just what they need to know, why it's important, give them the data that they understand, and then, bring them on side. Because if there are boards who are just focused on the bottom line, so maybe nonprofits a bit different, but I know of boards who are just, and companies, who are focused just on the bottom line, and you're not creating the vision of how that relates back, how managing and leading your people better relates back to the bottom line. If you're not making that link for them, then that's where I would suggest that would be an opportunity for growth in that area.
Thank you. And in banking, if it's not documented, it's not done, right? Absolutely.
If it's not written down, you can't hold anybody to it.
Right. And I know many organizations prepare a risk policy, prepare risk assessments, and many of them, is it just an exercise? Or to your point, isn't it much more valuable to give them the why of the risk assessment, not just because, my regulator needs it, so I've got to put together a risk assessment, but putting it together once a year, should it be more periodic, But what do you teach to the board of directors? I mean,
And stress the benefit.
right.
right? Because there's a reason why we're doing this, and it's to make sure that the organization is well looked after, is mitigating, there's good governance, and all that is in place. So talk about the benefit too, not just like, this is what you have to do, because then you're not going to engage anyone that way. You know, people don't like to be told, they like to be engaged, they like to be inspired. Talk to them about why it's important for the people you serve, and then also why it's important for your staff. Because at the end of the day, and I'll come back to this again, because oftentimes when I'm engaging with different people, you know, it's like, what about the bottom line? What about the shareholder? Well, who impacts that the most? It's your people. The people risk is linked to the operational risk, is linked to the financial risk, is linked to reputational risk, security risk, you name it, right? So if you are not addressing that risk because it's the hardest risk to address and you're avoiding it, that's where you want to start. Start there. Get your people on side, get them trained, get them thinking about making a shift from risk aversion to be able to have risk intelligence, create a safe space so that they can do their work.
Absolutely.
I agree.
What are the top 3 risks in your field right now?
Well, cryptocurrency. And I mean, obviously the real estate market's taken a hit, right? But it's a matter of how you read it, and it's a matter of where you are. And when it comes to a general investment strategy, I mean, I stressed this before, you have to look at the products that are not going to change over time, stuff that we have been doing for years. And this might be a little controversial, but it's been proven over time by economists, year after year, decade after decade. When we go to war, we get out of a recession. We do.
I heard that.
We do. And like, you know, everybody in the 90s was so happy about Clinton, you know, finding a surplus in the budget. Well, that surplus is gone. And there are many theories that he tried to start a war in Kosovo to try to get that army and military spending back, and also boosting the economy. He was right. It worked a little bit. It did. Cutting other types of services also worked, but when he was gone, we just kept building up the debt and building up the debt and building up the debt, and now we have a difficult scenario and a very difficult relationship with China. The politics of this is now affecting everybody's economy. Iran is sending missiles to our oil tankers. Like, we have to be able to be aware of the environment that we're in and take note of that, but then take that step back, try to put it into metrics, try to say, okay, over the last however many years, when did this scenario arise before? How can we try to attempt to right what we did wrong the first time? Because I don't know about you, but trial and error is a really great way to learn.
I don't know if you watched the 60 Minutes episode yesterday.
I was on a plane.
Speaking, because global risk, the global economy, are all factors. But at the rate that China is going, by 2025, they will completely surpass, their Navy will surpass our Navy in their capabilities. Our ships are very old. I forgot what, I think it was 25 years old, one of our biggest ships that it's out there. I mean, it's just, but 2025 is a year and a half away. That's it. So the global economy, what's going on in the world, definitely plays a factor in all our industries, right? What are the top 3
Definitely.
risks in your industry?
So I think I said it a few times. Can you guess? So top risk is not recognizing the importance of people. Okay, I'll just give you a little perspective. According to Gallup, the people who do the Gallup polls, low engagement levels are costing the world economy $7.8 trillion. Now, wouldn't engaging people, doing better job at leadership, be more fun than going to war? I think so. I don't know, just a thought.
It would save human lives.
Exactly. And then the second piece is around all the changes. I mean, we live in a post-pandemic world. Everything's upside down from when we, 2020. I think I was in Nashville, March 13th, 2020, when I had to rush back to Canada because they're going to close the borders. So if we try to lead like we did before, that's a huge risk. That is a huge risk. So then that begs the question, well, what do we do? Well, stay open and look at bringing in, what do people need right now? They're struggling. The people in your organizations are struggling. So even more concerning than the $7.8 trillion that's being wasted on low engagement levels is the fact that the International Labour Organization forecasts every year that 2.4 million people die linked to workplace illness, workplace stress. And they say that's an understatement. So there's really a pandemic going on in our offices, and this is global. So to me, those are huge risks. And then, of course, there's the adaptability in terms of the technology. There's AI coming in. I was just talking to a university professor last week, and he said, we're trying to figure out how to prepare the next generation. Documentation is key, even with AI, but learning how to put in the right queries. So learning how to do that is a new skill that's coming. Well, it's an adapted skill. It's an expanded skill that needs to be more broadly learned and encouraged. Because when we try to fight things that are big like AI or hybrid work or remote work and all those things, let me tell you, you're not going to win. Otherwise, we'd still be riding horses to work on a farm, instead of going to offices or staying at home and connecting. So we need to be adaptable. We need to figure it out and to pull together, to pull through. We can't do this by turning on each other. And so I would say another big thing I'm really concerned about is polarization and the degradation of civility and respect in workplaces. I'm getting calls from clients who are saying, I've never seen this before, Lisa. People are yelling at each other. They're getting physical at work. And this is in offices. So we need to pay attention to these things. And just as Rebecca mentioned, there's some global things going on, and your employees are afraid. They're concerned. So it's very hard to concentrate on a risk assessment when you think you're going to be submitted to the next pandemic or a war or whatever else. So that's why.
Default on our debt to
or
China.
Default, exactly. Or
China owns us, essentially.
You name it, right? So they're hearing it too, and it's very difficult to come into work and to concentrate. So by creating a safe space, that's your best bet. And you do that by not blaming them if they make mistakes, by supporting them, by you yourself doing the inner work to be the best version of yourself every single day, and to help them do the same. And I've written a book, it's called Light a Fire in Their Hearts, The Truth About Leadership. So I talk to a lot of, leaders at all levels. And what comes out loud and clear is that what sets great leaders apart is their ability to connect at the human level through compassion, courage, competence. The other stuff is also important, but you need that as your foundation. So I think those are the three things.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to double down on one of your comments in a second. And I think I've already shared what I felt in our industry are the top risks. One, cybersecurity is, and that kind of goes to the global situation as well. Cybersecurity is, and the money that's being put into managing that is, astronomical. Liquidity, which I already mentioned, and of course regulatory concern. It's ever evolving and ever changing, which is good for me. I mean, my company stays alive because of that, right? But in talking about people, we all developed a new vernacular during the pandemic, right? And all these new words and working remotely and Zoom and hybrid, and now then you had the Great Resignation. And I know every industry, not just financial services or law or real estate, is suffering. In the real estate industry, mass layoffs everywhere you go. But what I'm seeing also is this entitlement mentality where employees are getting far more aggressive in their demands, in things like that. How do you cope with that? How do you advise board of directors on that risk?
So for me, one of the things I say, resistance and aggression is really apprehension in disguise. So if people are acting that way, it's because in our society, it's more acceptable to turn to aggression, to be vocal, or to be passive-aggressive even, than it is to share, you know what, I'm really worried. And so we need to create situations where people feel comfortable coming to us and saying, you know what, this new thing that we're trying to implement, it's freaking me out because I think that, you know, AI is going to take my job. AI is going to, like, and if I lose this job, I don't know if I can get another one where I can, you know, work from home and take care of my aging mom or my small children and be there, or be there for my teenager who's contemplating suicide when they come home from school. So when you're seeing anger is just a way to share emotions in a way that's become, unfortunately, socially acceptable. What kind of society are we where it's socially acceptable to show anger instead of love and instead of, you know, helping each other? So, yeah, I think that's really important, is not to make those judgments at face value, because behind any kind of negative entitlement behavior, you'll get sadness, grief, shame, and anger is the easiest one to demonstrate.
Touching on your point of people becoming more aggressive or more vocal, I think it touches upon one of my favorite phrases, special snowflake. And I think this is something that has come about with like a younger generation of people. There's that sense of entitlement. They grew up in a very different era. I mean, when we started, it was about yelling. It was like that chain of yelling. Your boss yells at you, you yell at the person underneath you, the person underneath you cries, and it goes right back again. And then when someone comes new, you just do the same thing as if you're hazing them, right? So it's really kind of powerful that people in this new generation are taking ownership of their own identity. That being said, while we as managers and leaders need to adapt our methods to be able to communicate with them and actually make them more productive, I do think that there's a little bit on this generation side that needs to just kind of take a reality check. Like, it's a very difficult environment to A, find a job, B, keep that job, stay in the same industry, do what you love, if you're constantly turning around and saying, no, that's discriminatory. Well, not discriminatory, because that's a different issue. If you're like, oh, well, I'm offended because you had a tone, or you didn't use your camera on Zoom, so I think you're ignoring me. Like, at the end of the day, that stuff should be left at the door when you start work. There's a responsibility on both sides. As managers, it's our responsibility to respect the individuality of the people that we work with and the other employees of the organization. But at the end of the day, you guys sign contracts.
Yeah,
you have to perform.
I agree that it's a shared responsibility, and that's why we need to develop leadership at all levels. So starting at a very young age, because if somebody's kind of complaining and whining, that's not leadership, right? So we need to start to engender those values, help people become excellent at what they do, and also have conversations that are really open and meaningful without, the yelling, that's probably why there's so many people who are sick, right? But finding ways to have conversations that are meaningful and direct, right? And that we teach people to listen, and that we learn to listen. Instead of saying, telling, ask, tell me more. What do you mean? And then being able to course correct and mentor. We need to have mentorship roles. I mean, I've seen, and because they come and tell me, I walk into a workplace and there's a 22-year-old who comes up to me and says, I've been here 3 weeks. Nobody says hi. People are coming up to me asking me what I'm doing. Okay, so their manager forgot to introduce them around and explain what their role is. So it's a shared responsibility. Leadership at all levels is really important. So we need to start young.
Thank you. I'm going to ask 2 more questions. And the first one is, I'm in the process of writing an ebook on ChatGPT or artificial intelligence in general, and the risk and reward related to it. And it's on both sides, right? It certainly, to me, helps augment our processes and what have you, but if not used correctly, you can expose, in our case, our financial institutions, expose their intellectual property, put proprietary information. ChatGPT doesn't know what non-public personal information is. So, and then whatever you put out there is there permanently. But again, there are also rewards. What do you see as the risk and reward of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, for example?
I think what people tend to forget about the emergence of artificial intelligence is that it actually employs a whole bunch of IT people that are working to develop that technology. And that's where we should be looking. It should be that adaptation. We should be emerging with technology. We shouldn't be rejecting it because we think it's going to be a robot taking over our lives. No, the robot's going to help you do better shit, excuse my language, better things, more efficient things. It's going to allow you to look at your business in a different way because you're not in the weeds. And it's a tool. We have to adapt. We knew that this was coming. Clearly Hollywood knew this was coming. So everything is about adaptation to the emerging climate and marketplace that you're in. And I mean, yes, it's a risk if you work with your hands on something, but that doesn't mean that you can't learn it. I am learning something new every day. I'm trying to stay current, and that doesn't mean that nobody else, it means anybody can do that. You're not, if you get pushed out of your job because a computer is taking over your, company representative and customer service function, that means you have the ability to do something else. You can level up. You can go back to school. You can get a certification, which will bump your salary and make you more desirable. Or you can start your own company because you're tired of giving away a portion of your salary to a firm without getting benefits.
Yeah, no, it's true. So I was in Lisbon at the Running Remote conference, and it's all about, I think I was the oldest person there at 52. But it was really interesting to hear the conversation around artificial intelligence, and that there was fear, but not the same kind of fear we kind of hear in our offices most of the time. And it was more about how do we leverage this? How do we make sure that we learn to work the artificial intelligence? And a couple weeks ago, I interviewed someone who has 2 PhDs in artificial intelligence. His name is David Collier of Clearword. And he compared it to, well, what about when we introduced fridges? Right? Everybody was afraid that everybody who used to go cut ice from, icebergs or whatnot, would lose their job, and we adapted. So we're going to adapt.
Absolutely. Well, I think my last question was, what is one key takeaway, but I think we've already shared quite a few takeaways. So thank you again to my esteemed panel. Thank you to the participants for listening to us banter. It was fun, so thank you so much.
Thank you.